Southern Fried True Crime covers cases that are not suitable for young listeners, and there may also be some explicit language used. Listener discretion is advised. Domestic violence that ends in death is often called murder in slow motion. The danger builds at a pace we think we can keep up with. I have this under control. I can fix it. He will change. But he's the one in control. Coercive control is the foundation for most forms of domestic abuse. For Laura Ackerson, it seems like her whole life was a blur, a merry-go-round that was going way too fast. She came from generational trauma, and she walked away from it. She didn't have good role models or a stable support system. She had to build one for herself. She moved across the country and met her best friend Heidi. Heidi was someone Laura could count on. Unlike the charismatic musician she soon fell for. Grant Hayes was the seedy cliché of sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And he was a classic narcissist. For him, control equals power. But when Laura became pregnant, she thought she could build a family with Grant. Heidi had always known Grant was a scumbag. She despised him. But she never wavered in her support of Laura. And Laura needed her support, especially once she decided to finally stand up to a man like Grant. Welcome to episode 213, Erasing Laura Ackerson, Part 1. Laura Jean Ackerson lived most of her life as a small-town girl. She was born on April 30th, 1984, to parents Roger and Brenda in Hastings, Michigan. Hastings, with about 7,000 residents, is a small town in a rural county in southwest Michigan. There were 7 kids in the Hastings blended family. Roger was father to only 4 of the siblings, including Laura's half-brother Jason, who was 3 years older than her. She attended schools in Lake Odessa and Ionia, other small Michigan towns. Her family life was extremely tumultuous. Brenda and Roger separated when Laura was still a toddler. They went through a wrenching, traumatic divorce that divided the family, with loyalties to each parent on different sides. In 1996, 12-year-old Laura and her mother moved from Michigan to central Iowa. They lived in the tiny town of Sully that had only around 800 residents. It has closer to 900 these days. Though the town boasts 3 churches, you would need to drive almost 30 minutes to the closest hospital. In 2003, 19-year-old Laura graduated from Linville-Sully High School in Sully, Iowa. She was a year behind because of her tumultuous home life. But graduating under those circumstances is an achievement. So many young people get lost in the kind of family turmoil Laura experienced. In 2004, Laura followed her brother Jason to North Carolina. It was in Youngsville, another tiny rural town of almost 1,200 residents at the time. She stayed with Jason for 6 months, then moved to Raleigh for better job opportunities. She had also been disappointed to live in another tiny town with nothing to do. With almost 400,000 residents at the time, Raleigh is a big city and Laura loved it. She had never lived anywhere so exciting, with so much possibility and so many opportunities. She quickly found an apartment and got a job at an Applebee's restaurant. That's where she met her best friend, Heidi Schumacher. Heidi told author Diane Fanning that Laura was a perfect fit for waiting tables. Of course, it helped that she was such a pretty girl with long dark hair and a wide smile. But it was more than her looks. She was also a sweet and cheerful girl, liked by both customers and coworkers alike. Just a few months later, Laura and Heidi moved on to working at a sports bar together, and Laura had started taking online classes at Kirkwood Community College. She earned an Associates of Art degree in 2005 and thought she wanted to get her real estate license. She even took a 75-hour course to prepare. But she had really liked her graphic design and marketing courses at Kirkwood and decided to throw her passion into developing her graphic art skills. The real estate skills, along with her creativity, were put to good use at her next job at a furniture store in Raleigh, helping customers with decorating ideas. While there, she remained close to Heidi and Heidi's family, who were in Wake Forest, which was in between Raleigh and Youngsville, where her brother Jason still lived. Along with talking to her brother Jason all the time, Laura also stayed in contact with her father and at least one of her sisters, though it was letters and phone calls. It was also the beginning of Facebook, and Laura was reaching out to old friends and other siblings. From what I can tell, she didn't have much contact with her mother after she moved. She doesn't figure at all in the rest of this case. But this young woman seemed determined to build her own support system in North Carolina and also hang on to some of her family ties in the Midwest as well. Family ties were important to her, and she was building a different life for herself, nothing like the chaotic way she grew up. And yet, she was young, inexperienced, unworldly. She had an underdeveloped sense of self, and so she was passive and often unsure of herself. She was without guile and could be taken advantage of more easily than young women with more stable backgrounds. However, although Laura was naive, she was also smart, creative, and ambitious. She wasn't taking any other classes during this time, but she never stopped studying on her own. She scoured the internet and used the library. She was determined to open her own business one day, and her hard work was paying off until a man named Grant Hayes crashed into her life like a meteor. In March of 2007, 22-year-old Laura met a 27-year-old aspiring musician named Grant Hayes. His full name was Grant Ruffin Hayes III, and in a coincidence, he and Laura shared the same birthday. She had been born on April 30th of 1984, and he had been born 5 years before on April 30th of 1979. Grant's parents were Patsy and Grant Hayes Jr. Patsy Hayes owned and ran her own daycare, and Mr. Hayes was a minister. And this family had a thing for the name Grant, as Grant III has a sister named Grantina, who goes by Tina. Though the family was from Tennessee, they now lived in Kinston, North Carolina, about an hour and a half from Raleigh. In 1997, 18-year-old Grant graduated from Kinston High School. It was around that same time that Grant first began recording music. On his website, he called himself an acoustic soul singer. And he was pretty average. He could carry a tune, but nothing special. He accumulated a small following on MySpace, which was kind of like followers on Facebook, but he was definitely small time. The songs that he posted on YouTube averaged about 100 to 200 clicks, which I guess would have been pretty good for a bar star in the early 2000s. And he did book gigs at bars and other venues with some consistency. But he wanted to be a famous musician. He wrote his own songs, and to be fair, many people thought he had talent. He thought his career just hadn't taken off yet. This is his Twitter bio. Acoustic singer, musician, songwriter, contemporary artist, new releases, Earth, Wind & Fire and Little Richard collaborations, Grant Hayes art, and Grant Hayes music. He was a pretty decent artist, too. By the time of today's case, he was doing portraits for money. When Grant was 18 years old, he married a ballet dancer named Emily. The marriage didn't last a year. Grant was obstinate about getting a real job to help pay the bills, a problem he never grew out of. Emily was in college and supporting them by herself. She soon got sick of it. They separated quickly, but weren't formally divorced until March 2005. Then 2 years later, Grant met Laura Ackerson. She met him while he was playing a gig at the Blue Martini in Raleigh in early March 2007. Laura and Heidi saw him one night, and Laura talked to him between sets. Heidi had gone into the insurance business, moving to Charlotte, but she stayed close to Laura. They talked all the time and had girls' nights out as often as they could. On April 30th, 2007, Heidi took Laura to an Italian restaurant for dinner. It was her birthday. And Laura had exciting news. She had gotten married. Actually, that same day. Like I said, she and Grant shared a birthday, which she thought was so special. It was fate. He was just 5 years older than her. According to the book Bitter Remains by Diane Fanning, there had been no real wedding. They went to a justice of the peace in Raleigh and just walked in and did it. But I'll come back to this more later. Heidi was shocked and concerned. Grant was actually playing a gig at the restaurant that evening, so Laura introduced Heidi to her new husband. And although she recognized him from the Blue Martini, and he was friendly enough, Heidi took an immediate and intense dislike to him. The feeling would soon be mutual. He was so full of himself, obnoxious, and as she later told author Diane Fanning, not good enough for Laura, not by a long shot. Heidi wasn't wrong. She was smart to be worried for her kind, loving, and trusting friend. Laura had stars in her eyes when she saw Grant. Remember, she was from a small town, but Heidi wasn't. She knew bar stars in Raleigh were a dime a dozen, and she didn't see anything special in this arrogant jackoff. He had glommed onto Laura too quickly, and it was obvious to anyone but Laura. Just months into their marriage, when Laura was in her second trimester with their first child, Grant was openly cheating on her. He enjoyed calling the other women he was sleeping with while Laura was in the room. And he was allergic to real jobs. He refused. He slept all day and partied all night. When he did have a gig, his fee barely covered his bar tab. He brought all kinds of people over to the house at any hour of the night he chose and expected Laura to just suck it up, even after they had a baby in the house. And not just friends or other musicians, but groupies, and worse, drug dealers and pimps. Grant had a significant drug problem. After his marriage to Emily failed, he went through an intense depression and saw a psychiatrist. He was prescribed antidepressants and lithium. Lithium is prescribed for bipolar disorder. Like many people struggling with mood disorders, when he stayed on his meds and didn't self-medicate, Grant did all right. But he only did that for a short time after his first marriage fell apart. He even got back into religion for a quick minute. But that lasted as long as his sobriety. He just never could stay away from drugs and alcohol. Mostly weed and cocaine, but also psychedelics or hallucinogens. He wrote a lot of his music while on binges, and it became increasingly dark and the lyrics were disturbingly violent. Just as a note, I know that addiction is a disease. I just also know it's not an excuse for abuse. But Laura put up with all of it. She worked and supported them just like Emily before her, and she got pregnant right away. It's also important to note that Laura very much believed in Grant's talent and aspiring music career. She used her marketing skills to promote him and regularly helped book his gigs. So despite the cheating and the drugs and alcohol, Laura stayed with Grant, and her small support system tried to be there for her. Jason got a job close to where they lived and started visiting almost every day, until it began to anger Grant. Jason later testified about Grant and said he was pretty much ordering her that you don't need him in your life and you don't need to be around him. He's a bad influence. I'm all you need. The last time Jason stopped by their house, he didn't get an answer when he knocked at the door, even though he could hear them inside arguing. He tried for 10 minutes and called her several times that day worried. She didn't call him back until the next day. He later testified, "She let me know that I wasn't allowed to come over there and that if we were to see each other, we'd have to do it in secret because Grant didn't like me." Jason stopped coming around, But even his calls threw Grant into a rage. He stopped calling Laura and waited for her to call him, which she did whenever she could. Jason stayed in his sister's life however he could because he could now see she needed him more than ever. The same thing happened with Heidi. She and Grant hated each other, so she wasn't welcome at the Hayes home either. Like Jason, she stayed in constant touch with Laura, very worried for her friend, particularly after one horrible afternoon. She had been on the phone with Laura and heard Grant screaming at her in the background. He said Heidi was a bad influence and told her to hang up. Laura, apologizing to Heidi and crying, hung up the phone. Heidi wasn't having it, so she drove over to their place. She saw Grant leaving the parking lot, and when Laura came out the front door with a bloody nose and one of her eyes swollen shut, Heidi begged her to go to the hospital, but Laura refused. Laura was crying so hard, but kept insisting everything was okay. She said he had never done this before, and that they would get through it. Heidi stayed with her friend for a while until Laura calmed down. She saw her a couple days later, and it was obvious that Laura had tried to cover up her bruises with makeup. Heidi felt helpless, but she couldn't force Laura to do anything. Grant and Laura's first child, a son named Grant Ruffin Hayes IV, was born on May 2nd, 2008, almost a year to the day of their marriage. After the baby was born, Laura became so much more isolated. Jason didn't meet his nephew until he was 6 months old. Heidi started meeting up with Laura wherever she could, but Grant would often find them. One day, he pulled up to a Starbucks where they were meeting and threatened to kill Laura and Heidi. Heidi later testified, "He just went off and said, 'I have friends, I'm powerful. My friends are powerful, and I can kill you. Don't fuck with me.'" After that, Heidi bought a gun and got a conceal and carry permit and tried to talk Laura into getting a gun too. But Laura was afraid of guns and refused. So Heidi bought her a pink-handled knife that Laura carried with her always. Laura had so much on her plate, taking care of little Grant and working to support them, and she felt increasingly scared of and disgusted by her husband. He wanted all kinds of sex that Laura was uncomfortable with, and he wanted her to brag about their sex life and his penis size to his fans. He wanted an open marriage. The list goes on and on. Laura would later tell a psychologist that Grant had, quote, "used sex as a tool to punish and mold my behavior instead of a way to show affection." He also had incredibly strange, philosophical, and religious ideas, and frankly what sounds a lot like delusions of grandeur. His parents even staged what they called an intervention with Laura about their own son, warning her about his sick worldview. I won't even go into all that mess here, except that they claim Grant thought he would repopulate the world one day by having 50 kids with 50 different women. What was not at all fantastical or Scientologyist is that Grant Jr., Laura's father-in-law, said his son would pimp her out if he needed to. Then Laura thought back to all the women hanging around Grant and his felon friends. They joked and called the women party favors. At least Laura thought it had been a joke. Now she felt sick. Grant's parents also gave Laura Emily's phone number, Grant's ex-wife. She simply said, run as fast as you can." And with all this, Laura finally seemed to come around. Grant's sister Tina took her to file assault charges at the magistrate's office, and Laura looked into a shelter in Charlotte for abused women, which would have been good for Laura since Heidi lived in Charlotte. But she never followed through on anything. She didn't show up to the hearing for the assault charge. She had been living with Heidi's family in Wake Forest, but she returned to Kinston and vowed to make her marriage work. She is not the first woman in an abusive relationship to still be in love with her abuser and want to make it work, and it won't be the last time she was close to leaving Grant either. I understand that it's hard to hear these details without being in full disbelief. But never blame a victim of abuse. On average, it takes a victim 7 times to leave before it is for good. And this was only Laura's first try. Around March of 2009, Grant was becoming restless and frustrated about his lack of success in his music career. He had all kinds of excuses for his problems, but eventually complained to a friend who was an agent promoter type named Joseph Harden, who thought he should move to the U.S. Virgin Islands. Harden thought Grant's style of music was perfect for the Caribbean, and soon, the selfish Grant was in paradise, with his wife and son back home in Kinston, struggling. Now he described his music as reggae folk. He settled on the island of St. John, and within a month he had a girlfriend and had informally changed his name to Grant Hayes, spelled Haze. He never changed it legally. All current and past court documents still refer to him as Grant Hayes with a Y. As usual, he pretty much bragged about the women he was seeing to Laura on the phone. She once again screwed up her courage to leave him and moved in with Heidi's parents, as she could not afford a place of her own yet. She was considering going to stay with her dad in Michigan when she discovered she was pregnant again. She was already 3 months along. She had probably conceived in February before Grant took off for the Caribbean. So Laura once again decided to make her marriage work for the sake of her small growing family. She took little Grant and followed her husband to St. John Island. Their second son, named Gentle Rain, spelled Reign, was born on St. John, 2 months premature, on August 3, 2009. Nothing changed in the Hayes marriage. If anything, Grant's drug use worsened, and his career was just as much of a joke. His friend, Joseph Harden, had come to find that it wasn't so much that Grant wasn't talented as it was that he was lazy. He wanted to play his easy gigs and live off of a woman. But that wasn't easy with Laura having 2 babies under 2 years old to take care of. How was she supposed to work? Harden also witnessed Grant threatening both Laura and her children. Not only was Laura as miserable, if not more so, than when she had been back home in North Carolina, Gentle had medical issues relating to being born premature that she preferred to take care of back home. Most importantly, he needed surgery for a stent to be placed between his bladder and kidney. Laura returned to Kinston and moved into a rental property owned by Grant's parents. It was next door to Patsy's daycare, and she cleaned it at night in exchange for rent. But she would come to regret this agreement. To make money, she started a freelance business called Go Fish Graphic Designs. She was finally using her skills, creating logos and other designs for businesses. Meanwhile, Grant had finally found a sugar mama, a wealthy widow 7 years older than him. That widow was 37-year-old Amanda Perry Smith. She was born in April 1972 in Texas. She had come to the Virgin Islands after her third husband had died. I'm not here to marriage shame Amanda. She had generational trauma related to her mother's divorces that was somewhat similar to Laura's sad early life. She married at 16 to get away from her family and had her first daughter, Shay. Her second marriage didn't work out, so she divorced, but then struck gold on her third. He was rich and 14 years older than her, but she insisted it was a love match. She was heartbroken when he was fatally injured in an accident on a lake. But she did get a decent settlement from his estate after a fight with his brother and grown children. Amanda had been vacationing on St. John when she decided to embrace island life forever and move there permanently. Her teenage daughter, Shay, who had lived with her sister back in Texas, agreed to come and live with her mom on St. John and finish high school there. Back in the States, Amanda had been a cosmetologist, a real estate agent, and an actress. She had even nabbed a few small roles in The O.C., The Sopranos, and The Stepford Wives. In the Virgin Islands, Amanda got into painting and opened an arts and crafts supply store with her daughter. Laura was, again, painfully aware of this relationship. Grant played it off, saying he was just using Amanda for the money, which he was, but he had no intention of getting off this gravy train. In January of 2010, he followed Amanda and Shay to New York City. Laura thought it was for a record deal. She had no idea they were moving there together, or rather, that Grant was following his meal ticket. According to the book Bitter Remains, in February, around Valentine's Day, Grant came home to Kinston for a while and talked Laura into letting little Grant come to New York, supposedly to make a Baby Gap ad. Heidi begged her to not let him do this. She was afraid he wouldn't return little Grant. When the time was up, the days turned into weeks and Laura's fears grew. She was afraid to make legal moves because she wasn't sure how Grant would react. She just kept pleading for them both to come home. Then in March, he stopped paying child support. Heidi had been right. He had no plans to give up little Grant. At the end of March, Laura filed a pro se request for Grant to return her son. This is a lawsuit filed without an attorney. Grant promised to send her a plane ticket to pick up little Grant if she dropped the lawsuit. She did, and he promptly canceled the ticket. Everything was a game to him. Anything to dodge supporting his children or having to go to court. All the while, he had been reassuring Laura that he was just using Amanda for her money and their relationship wasn't serious. He was playing Amanda just like he was playing Laura. Amanda had not been planning on taking on a toddler to raise, but guess what? She was now not only paying for everything, she was also basically a full-time stepmom to a toddler. The only thing she needed was a marriage certificate. And in April 2010, she and Grant took his 2-year-old son to Vegas with them for a quickie marriage. Grant and Amanda's marriage came to a huge shock to Laura. Laura obviously thought she was married to Grant. After Grant cruelly sent her photos of his wedding, she said she dug through her papers and realized that he had never signed their wedding certificate. As an aside, this part is strange to me. It feels glossed over a bit in Diane Fanning's book. She simply wrote that they went to a justice of the peace. There were no other details about the wedding. Other media sources just say Grant and Laura were never married. Court documents say they were in a domestic relationship but never married. So what happened? In North Carolina, you need a marriage license from the County Register of Deeds before the ceremony. This is much like anywhere else, though there is not a waiting period after. The marriage ceremony must be conducted by a magistrate or recognized officiant, and there must be 2 witnesses who sign the marriage license. The minister or magistrate performing the ceremony must sign the marriage license and return it to the Register of Deeds office within 10 days of the ceremony. Once you've been married, you will be able to obtain copies of your marriage certificate from the Register of Deeds office or from North Carolina Vital Records. Sorry to bore you with all that, but I wanted to get it straight. So Grant would have signed the license, not the certificate. If the magistrate married them, they would have filed the license right away. So her story just doesn't make sense. And beyond that, there are simple questions. Who were the 2 witnesses? Did Laura have a wedding ring or a diamond that she was so thrilled about? Not that you need a ring to be legally married, but still. None of this is mentioned in Bitter Remains or anywhere else that I found. I know I'm harping on this, but it just seems really strange to me. I don't know how he could have tricked her if they indeed went to a justice of the peace, aka a magistrate. And Heidi said she was so excited that day. They had married on April 30th, their birthdays. It was symbolic and like fate to Laura. Heidi certainly believed they were married. I guess it's possible the license was somehow never filed, but why would a magistrate not file the license? Maybe Laura was ashamed to admit the truth. Maybe Grant had made some sort of promise to her that day and told her she should say that they were already married to her friends and family. Because he was older than her and moving in with her so fast, maybe he thought telling everyone they were married would put her friends and family at ease. And being in love and trusting him, Laura went along with it. And as time went on, she was too ashamed to admit the truth to anyone. So when Grant did marry Amanda, Laura was shocked and hurt, but had to somehow explain how he suddenly got married. So she came up with a story that he had never signed the certificate. And she told Heidi he had stopped paying child support, so she filed the pro se request. It's the wording and then the legal action. That sounds like she knew they were either divorced, legally separated, or never married to begin with. Anyway, it's a detail that really bugs me, and a rabbit hole I spent way too long on. I even stopped during this recording and watched a YouTube video on North Carolina marriage licenses. Lord. I guess, whatever the truth is, Grant is still a piece of shit who relished in sending Laura the photos of his wedding to Amanda. So there we are. And Amanda certainly had fancy wedding and engagement rings, even if she did have to pay for them herself. Following their marriage, Grant and Amanda moved from New York to an apartment in Raleigh, North Carolina. The newlyweds wanted to be closer to both of Grant's sons. They had basically kidnapped little Grant, but Laura still had physical custody of baby Gentle. So now, the fight was on. Grant fired the first shot in the custody battle when he managed to get an emergency ex parte hearing with a judge. This is a legal request for temporary custody or changes in custody arrangements without providing prior notice to the other parent or guardian. Ex parte means that only one party is involved in the initial hearing without the presence of the opposing party. It is usually in cases where a parent is worried their child is being abused or neglected. Grant convinced a judge to sign the temporary order because he said Laura was an unfit mother who posted a Craigslist ad for a free roommate, implying that she was offering sex in exchange for housing. And he said she was having trouble controlling little Grant, so that's why he had to come live with him in New York. So he tricked her twice. And this is also why he flew to Vegas for the quickie marriage, because his attorney warned him the judge would view his cohabitation with Amanda as harshly as any alleged internet solicitation by Laura. It's hard to believe this worked, but it did. Laura was horrified when police officers served her the papers on June 15, 2010. They took baby Gentle out of her arms and turned him over to Grant. He hadn't even had his surgery yet. Gentle would finally have his surgery a few weeks later. Laura jumped into action and got her own hearing on June 25th. But she appeared unstable to a judge because she didn't have steady work and she didn't have a permanent home. That part pisses me off. I feel like Grant's parents must have refused to explain their arrangement with Laura. Because honestly, it's not like Grant or Amanda had jobs. They were just blowing through her inheritance money. And they were anything but stable. They had just moved from St. John to New York and back to Raleigh. And in the middle of these moves, running off to Vegas for their wedding, taking a 2-year-old little boy with them. And where the hell was Tina, who had tried to get Laura to file charges against her abusive brother? It's just so shitty to me. I know. Family stays with family. But Laura was still the mother of their grandchildren. They had once cared about her enough to stage an intervention to get her away from their own son. And now this? Meanwhile, Laura was trying to take care of a baby with health problems and cleaning their daycare at night in return for living in one of their rentals. She had apparently thought she was still married, or at least still in a relationship with Grant Hayes III, with a stable home that the Hayes family owned up until less than 2 months before this new nightmare began. It's not like she had much time to find a new place and get work, but she had even started her own graphic design business while taking care of a baby by herself. To me, on paper, she seemed to be trying a hell of a lot harder than Grant. Grant and Laura had both made accusations to the judge that were disturbing. Only Laura's were true, but she would have to prove it. to a court-ordered psychologist. At the June 25th hearing, they came to a custody arrangement that Grant would have the kids during the week and Laura would have them every weekend. She hated it, but unfortunately had little choice. She was about to start a job that was Monday through Friday. Grant's music gigs were mainly on the weekend. It made sense, for now. At least until she could talk to the psychologist. Since Grant had pulled this bullshit ex parte order, he had been the one to open the can of worms, accusing his ex of being an unfit mother. So the judge ordered Grant to pay for the psychologist and appointed a woman named Dr. Ginger Calloway. The first 2 payments were $5,000 each. I'm sure Amanda signed those checks pretty bitterly. She had wanted her man and got him, but she had to pay for everything, including his custody fight. Maybe in a way she didn't mind, because she was certainly jealous of Laura. While on St. John, Grant's friends saw her as a hostile, jealous little groupie, the type to pick fights with girls looking at her man. Her seemingly glamorous life with Grant had quickly begun to tarnish. But Amanda would rather die than admit it. They were blowing through her inheritance at an alarming rate. She had $250,000 in cash and assets, but Grant lived like the money would never run out. And he certainly never contributed to the cash flow. Typical Grant never had a real job. His gigs, when he had one, never paid much. Meanwhile, Laura was thriving. She busted her butt to prove to the court she was the stable parent. She had a job working at a health food store. She had found an apartment and a bright, airy loft in a converted warehouse space, with a small room for the boys that she had filled with toys and creative, cheerful decorations. Gentle still had a crib, and little Grant had a small race car bed. You can see their small but happy space and sad crime scene photos. A detective commented on See No Evil that he could tell Laura's whole life revolved around her children. Almost everything in her apartment was for the boys. Small child tables with little chairs, art stands, race cars, and stuffed toys. The apartment was small but safe, with security cameras and 2 keys needed, and a garage with a remote opener required so that she didn't have to park on the street. Laura chose a warehouse loft with safety in mind, but also full of light and warmth. Along with her full-time job, she had her 2 up-and-coming graphic design businesses. She still had Go Fish, and she had started a new advertising agency with her friend and business partner, Siobhan Mathis. Laura was even taking classes again, this time at Pitt Community College, working to improve their new business. She was meeting clients all the time, signing new contracts. She and Siobhan were so excited. Laura Ackerson didn't just want a job. She wanted a career. She wanted to be successful. She was smart and creative, and she knew she could do it. Her confidence and self-esteem grew brighter every day. As far as her custody fight, Heidi advised her to document everything. Laura got a diary or a day planner to do that, and a tape recorder. She kept every voicemail, email, and text from Grant. She suspected he had hacked her email, so she created another email address that she now used with Heidi and her lawyer. Grant tried calling child services on Laura for small bruises on little Grant and Gentle, the normal kind active little boys get. No charges were filed, no case was opened. And Grant's voluminous emails were another thing. Long, ranting, hateful emails. In one, he even brought up her painful childhood, saying, "You got a raw deal when you were their age, and now you are trying your damnedest to make sure your kids get one." It was cruel. After this, Laura told him to stop emailing her unless it was specifically about their schedule. Not that it stopped him, she just stopped responding. Which, for a narcissist like Grant Hayes, would be worse than arguing. He needed her attention. On a Saturday in September 2010, Grant called Laura at around 1 o'clock, trying to pick up the boys a day early. Not only was she not going to give up her day, she looked out her window and saw him sitting in his car outside her apartment. That made her uneasy. She refused, saying they would meet the next day as scheduled in the public spot that had been agreed upon during the custody arrangement. It was a convenience store called Sheetz in the city of Wilson, which is kind of in between Kinston, where Laura lived, and Raleigh, where Grant and Amanda were. Each parent had to drive an hour to Wilson, but if they drove straight to each other's homes, it would be more like an hour and a half. So it seemed fair, and public was best, less chance of arguing or scenes. If you ask me, this was Grant stalking her. He just shows up at her house, calls her, and asks to come in and get his boys, with no advance warning. The guy that emailed and texted her all the time, it feels like he was watching her apartment. A year passed while Laura suffered through this abuse, missing her boys through the week while they were with Grant. Amanda seesawed between picking the nastiest fights with her over everything to then being kind enough to invite her to Thanksgiving so she could spend it with her boys. Laura politely declined, saying she didn't want to risk violating the court order. But despite all the venom from Amanda, Laura actually felt better that she was in the home taking care of her boys. She might be a bitch to Laura, but as far as she could tell, she was good to her boys. Laura even sent her a thank you note for being there for her sons and making an effort to get along with her. Not that she got a response, but Amanda could be civil when she wanted to. Then something would come up and both Amanda and Grant would be hateful and threatening again. Laura may not have known it, but it was probably due to money stresses. Custody battles are expensive, and like I said, Grant still lived like a king on Amanda's money. The problem was, the money was dwindling down fast. And just like Laura, Amanda also became pregnant during that first year with Grant. Another stressor. Despite now being pregnant with Grant's child, she was still jealous of Laura and as hateful as her husband. So Laura treaded carefully. She was very formal, polite, and always positive in her communications, while Grant and Amanda were mostly rude and childish. By that December, Grant and Amanda were selling off Amanda's jewelry to make the bills. And still, Grant went to Hawaii, supposedly to find work early that spring. He didn't come home until May, when Amanda thought she was going into labor. It wound up being Braxton Hicks, false labor. But now he stayed because the baby was coming soon. In May 2011, Dr. Calloway was finished with her evaluation, and it was a beast of a report. The big succinct takeaway for me was that she only recommended some parent coaching for Laura, who we have to remember was still young and in many ways naive. But for Grant, she advised him to see a psychiatrist for mood disorders, which, if you remember, would make sense, as he had been diagnosed as bipolar years before and had taken lithium. She also thought he lacked credibility with his accusations about Laura and was manipulative. And she said he had polysubstance abuse problems and needed regular drug testing. Dr. Calloway also felt that both Grant and Amanda wanted to, quote, obliterate Laura from the children's lives. They both talked about moving out of state, to Nashville for Grant's career or back to the Caribbean. They didn't see Laura's rights as the boy's mother at all in their big plans. Dr. Calloway included Grant's parents in this evaluation. Quote, it's critical that the court be informed regarding the insensitivity of Grant and Amanda and the paternal grandparents regarding the children's deep need for an unalterable bond with Laura. I was right about Patsy and Grant Jr. leaving Laura out in the cold. Now that Grant was with Amanda, they didn't care about Laura's rights anymore. That whole family just wanted to erase Laura from the picture entirely. But despite all the negative, disturbing things in the report about Grant, Dr. Calloway recommended the custody arrangement to be changed to a shared 50-50 arrangement. A 2-3-2 schedule. Like, Laura gets the kids for 2 days, then they go to Grant for 3 days, then back to Laura for 2. Then the next week, they would switch. Grant would get them for 2 days at a time, and then Laura 3. Which, geez, talk about unstable. I don't get that lady's thinking. She seemed to recognize not just the mental health issues of Grant Hayes, but his drug abuse and his manipulative nature. She worried that he and his entire family were trying to remove Laura from her children's lives, and yet she recommends 50-50. This is a literal quote about Grant in her report. It is disturbing that his intense rage serves as an anchor for his disturbed thinking. Seriously, Doc, what the fuck? Laura was disappointed by the recommendation, but she had not lost hope. She was still elated about the psych evaluation. She had a stable home and job. She had completed the required paperwork immediately, shown up on time, and interacted lovingly with her sons. Her sons behaved better in her care, and it showed in the evaluation. She felt pretty sure that Grant knew he was about to lose. So did her attorney. Her mood over the next few weeks was buoyant. Amanda wound up having a C-section on June 9th, 2011. The couple had a baby girl. Laura took the kids for the week that Amanda had the baby because, as Diane Fanning put it, Grant could be very reasonable and polite when he wanted something. And he needed Laura to take the boys because Amanda was due any day. Laura even brought the boys up to the hospital to meet their new sister. She was able to work out her schedule with Siobhan, sharing her car so Siobhan could meet with clients while she had the boys. And she offered to take the boys whenever she could during the week to give Amanda breaks. She obviously wanted to see her sons, but she also always tried to show kindness to Amanda. Not that it really mattered. You would think Amanda might have appreciated the time to herself and her new baby, but her attitude towards Laura stayed the same. The fight wasn't over. Laura was going to get full custody of her sons, and it seems like Grant and Amanda could feel it too. She wouldn't stop until she had her boys. Armed with the psych evaluation, her new career, her home, and of course, all of her meticulous record keeping, she was ready for her next court date. Grant and Amanda were almost out of money, had no serious jobs, and were about to be evicted. Unfortunately, Grant's parents didn't have any rental properties open for him at the time. He and his family would be moving home with Mama and Papa Hayes. Laura and Grant had a hearing scheduled for August 15th, and her lawyer felt like she had a realistic chance at getting full custody despite Calloway's recommendation, which meant that Grant Hayes had lost control. He was about to lose his home, and he was out of money. He was about to lose custody of his sons, and he had lost control of Laura, which made him a very dangerous man. Southern Fried True Crime is hosted and produced by me, Erica Kelley. Part 2 of Erasing Laura Ackerson is coming out in a couple of days. God willing and the creek don't rise. Today's episode was researched and written by me and Andrea Marshbank. As usual, any editorial comments and opinions are my own. Southern Fried's original music is by Rob Harrison of Gamma Radio, and the original graphic art is by Coley Horner. Today's episode was edited and mixed by Brendan Scheck-Snyder of Southern Gothic and Erica Kelley. Thank you to Marcia for suggesting this case. If you have any case suggestions, please go to my website, southernfriedtruecrime.com, and click on the Listener Suggestion tab, or email sftcresearch@gmail.com. This is the best way for me to get those little-known cases y'all always send me. Please remember that I do not accept suggestions on social media private messages, but please do come join our Facebook group, Southern Fried True Crime Fans Discussion Group, where we swap recipes, worship Dolly Parton, and share memes. We do, of course, discuss true crime, not just Southern Fried, but all kinds, but it is still very much a Southern lifestyle group. Our group is a safe and fun corner of Facebook, and by God, we mean it when we say no shit asses allowed. It's not just a motto, it's how we run the group. If you enjoyed today's show, don't forget to subscribe, and please tell a friend or rate and review. I'm also on all large platforms like iTunes, iHeart, Spotify, Amazon, Audible, and YouTube. Until next time, thanks so much for listening. Y'all take care.